Well, hi there, and welcome to Season 5 of the All Around Growth Podcast. This is episode number 1. My name is Rob Kaiser, and I am your host. For all of you Patreon subscribers, this is being recorded and delivered to you on Tuesday, January 2nd, 2023. For everybody who is not a Patreon subscriber, this will be available Tuesday, January 9th. If you want to become a Patreon subscriber and get early access to all content that is public, exclusive access to interviews with the audience and other content creators, then by all means, please consider doing so at patreon.com/allaroundgrowth. And if you want to participate in a tight-knit community of people who interact with each other regularly and cultivate deep connections, then please consider joining the Telegram group at t.me/allaroundgrowth. Now, in today's episode, episode 1, we are going to talk about the new year and what's in store for the podcast. Now, we talked a lot about that in a past episode, and that was episode number 531. In addition to episode number 530, it was primarily 531 where we talked about our 2023 podcast stats and what's next for 2024. I would recommend going back and listening to the last episode, episode number 531, titled Unveiling Our 2023 Podcast Stats and What's Next in 2024. And so you can see where we were at that point when we released that just New Year's Eve. And for Patreon subscribers, that came out last week. But over the course of the last week or so, things have changed a little bit. What do I mean by change? Well, more orders have come in. Production levels demand an increase due to increased sales. And for those of you who are new to the show, for those of you who are just tuning in, I live here at York Meadow Farm. We are a budding homestead, a family homestead that we are building from scratch, from raw land. That was the only thing that was here 7 years ago was a pavilion and a horseshoe pit. Over the past 6-7 years, we built a 40 by 64 barn and a log cabin, a high tunnel, which I guess was technically built a few years before the construction of everything else. But over the past 6-7 years, we've built that, finished them off. Inside the barn, we constructed an office where I'm recording right now, and then we proceeded to construct a commercial kitchen for the fermented food operation that was taking place here at York Meadow Farm. And since then, the York Meadow Farm business has undergone some transitions, some rebranding, and the incorporation of new LLCs to conduct business with the fermented foods due to the success that we were having. And that is the business that I'm talking about right now with regard to increased sales, increased production, and changes that are taking place. We received more orders than were expected last week on account of New Year's for people to have their beloved pork and sauerkraut. And that drained some of the existing inventory, which was able to get replenished with what's in production. But right now I've got little in production and a little less than I'm comfortable with based on the current demand from retailers and the upcoming farmers market that's taking place at Boyert's Greenhouse and Farm, which begins on the 13th of January. I will link to all of this in the show notes so you can learn more about York Meadow Farm, so you can learn more about Natural Ferments, the business, and you can learn more about where we are having indoor winter farmers markets. But for now, how has that impacted the show, and how has that impacted what we talked about just a week ago? And for those of you, just a week ago. Well, it's impacted it in that I got sick last week. It wasn't a debilitating cold. I had a head cold, but the reality was I was moving a little slower than usual and also trying to keep up with, business as usual. And the luckily I in large part kicked the cold before I had to actually get back into the kitchen. But I realized that there was a lot going on. And a lot in my head. So I put down on paper all the things that are going on, with the business, all the things that are going on with the plans that we have, all the things that are going on with our tenant farmer, all the things that are going on with contractors that we're looking at having major improvements. We're looking to contract major improvements out to this year here on the homestead. Purchases that were made to facilitate the increased growth and demand of the products that we make and sell here. Changes to the actual business model of the farm that we discussed as a family last night, and communicating further to our customer base that we are operating as a cooperative of sorts. And we'll talk more about that later based on your input. And over the past month and a half, we have created a Patreon page, which, like I said, you can join at patreon.com/allaroundgrowth. We've delivered some different content there. We've done some different things, and a lot of the reason and rationale for the Patreon page was to expand and grow the show, delivering additional content, exclusive content to the ones who support us the most. We've got some initial goals in place to reach 10 subscribers. And in a recent conversation with Brian from the Lots Project, which is available to Patreon subscribers, we talked about a lot of things that we were reviewing, a lot of things that we were discussing towards the end of the year, and talking about ways to essentially simplify. And this post, or this conversation that we had, and a lot of the dialogue around that stemmed from a post that I made in the Telegram group called, which was a mugshot post, hashtag mugshot, hashtag my three things. And my three things for that day was simplify, simplify, simplify. And that was when I was really honing in on the list of priorities and all of the to-do list, actually honing in on that to-do list and prioritizing said to-do list. And that was something that apparently Brian from the Lots Project and his wife Corey had been talking a lot about lately as well. So we decided to connect and talk about that amongst ourselves and compare notes and basically just have an off-the-cuff discussion about what that means to us and what we're doing and why. Since that discussion, I've given a lot more thought and consideration to what I'm doing and why. And the reality is I keep adding on and I keep adding on and I keep adding on to my life. And this is a show where we talk about finding balance and achieving that balance across 7 areas of life: physical, financial, personal development, family, spiritual, social, and career. And what's happening, what I've realized, is that I keep adding on and I keep adding on and I keep adding on. And I'm realizing that the cup overfloweth. and something's got to give somewhere. And a large part of the discussion that Brian and I had involved taking a good hard look, an honest look at all the things that are going on and determining what of the things we do provides the maximum return on investment. Okay? And I'm not talking about strictly financial gains here. I'm talking about the overall return on the investment of our time, effort, and energy, in addition to our finances. And the return can come in each of those 7 ways. It can come financially, physically, spiritually. It can come with family. It can come socially, with our careers. It can come in all manner of ways. But the more I take on, the less I can give out. And what I'm realizing is when I give, the more I receive. But if I continue to receive without giving, then I begin to lack. I begin to falter, and I begin to fail. So I've got to set some boundaries. I've got to set some benchmarks, and I've got to set some goals. And if I don't achieve those goals, or if I don't achieve those benchmarks, then I need to reevaluate my goals. Because at the end of the day, I will always achieve my goals if they are clearly defined. So some of the goals that I have are with regard to the Patreon page and achieving a certain amount of subscribers in a certain time frame. And if I don't do that, then I need to reevaluate what I'm doing with the Patreon account and potentially even consider closing that out, because for what I'm putting into the Patreon page, while it may be of value to the people that are there, the quantity of people that are there may not necessarily warrant what I'm putting into it, right? So I'm at a point right now where I had a conversation with someone recently about bringing more into the show and doing more with the show. And a lot of that involves streaming. And the streaming is largely dependent on the support from the Patreon community. And quite frankly, if that support's not there, then I can't really justify doing the streaming just because it's cool and I like it. There's a lot of things that are cool and a lot of things that I like, but a lot of things that I can't do because it isn't really consistent with the current mechanisms in place for the way that I live my life. For example, I think hang gliding and paragliding is cool, but I'm not really in a position to do that at this time for a number of reasons. I hope to in the future, but at this time, just because I think it's cool and just because it's something that I want to do doesn't mean I can go out and do it tomorrow. If I did, and I could, it probably wouldn't be the smartest or the wisest or most financially viable thing to do. So I wait. I don't do those things. And the same kind of ideas apply to the show. Over the course of the past few years, in the past seasons 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it's hard to believe that we're already in season 5 of the show, and breaking out the show into seasons is something new in its own right. But it's going to help me personally and help the audience as it continues to grow identify where we're at in the whole scheme of life here at York Meadow Farm and where I am at in the grand scheme of life as a person. And hopefully, those of you who are listening can relate to the different phases, the different phases of life and the progression and transition of life. And hopefully that's something that you can not only identify with, but having these seasons in place will allow us to, identify that just a little bit more, a little bit further. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us with a lot of uncertainty. And as I was just alluding to, in the past, this used to be a daily show. And at some point in time, around season 3 or season 4 perhaps, I made a decision to go from a daily show to a weekly show. Depending on the nature of the show, it still required some time inputs, and it still required review of the show notes and uploading. And granted, I don't do much editing, but to provide a comprehensive podcast description and links to what I was talking about and all of that, to make this of value, instead of just having some audio out there to listen to with nothing accompanying it, it takes a little bit of time. And so does the Patreon. Now, this is a bit of a dilemma because I went from daily to weekly, and I'm now entertaining the idea of making additional adjustments to that based on what happens in the future. Now, there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of variables. You know, if the recent purchase of a food processor accelerates the production time to a point where I've got more time available, then I will revisit what we are talking about today. But there's a big learning curve with that too. And there's a big learning curve with additional retail locations that will be selling at in the 2024 season. We're going to be in a 4th retail location. We'll be at 1, potentially 2 markets. So we'll see how all this goes. But, 4 retail locations and 2 markets a week for a one-man operation it's a lot. It's a lot. And while I want to share this journey with you and I want to continue sharing it with you, I'm not really sure how. Is it going to be weekly? I'm not sure. Is it going to be just me every week? I'm not sure. Will each show, or a majority of shows for the 2024 year, season 5, include guests where we're talking about any kind of all manner of different things, and maybe have little series within the shows as part of season 5? I don't know. All of these things are being entertained, but they need to be clearly delineated before I can actually move forward and make clear decisions. So what I wanted to do today was kind of expand on what's in store for 2024, because as I took a hard look at everything that needs to be done, the reality is there's a lot that needs to be done, and a lot that needs to be changed, and a lot that needs to be adjusted, and goals that still need some clear definition, because what I had previously discussed with regard to goals and having them done and complete over the course of the 48 days leading up to the first of the year, I still have some work to do. So there's been a lot of focus on career. There's been a lot of focus on my spiritual and social life, a lot of focus on my family. There has not been a lot of focus on my finances. There's not been a lot of focus on my personal development. There's not been a lot of focus on my physical wellness. And I think in large part that contributed to me getting a cold. It's, if you will, God's way of saying, hey, 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 hey. It's time for you to slow down. Relax. Because if you don't, you're going to get real sick. And that's what I did. I recognized as soon as I started feeling off, I rested more, increased my intake of these homeopathic cold remedies that I very much like and use, and rested and recovered relatively quickly. If we don't pay attention to what's happening in our lives when they happen, then we're going to miss out on the potential of things that might happen. So to be aware and be present and be in the moment is critical. It's very, very important. And the more I take on, the more I get involved, the more I do, the less present I am. And I'm recognizing this. And the reality is, I'm very involved in my community locally. I'm very involved with my family. I'm very involved with the family business. I'm very involved with the new business, growing and developing that. I'm very involved with my spiritual life, my church, and the community there. There's a lot that's going on in life. And guys, I'm just not sure how to balance it. I'm not sure how to manage it. But in part, the whole reason why I started this show in the very beginning was to share with you how I was managing it. And it was just 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, when this show started. And it started because I wasn't happy with life, and I wasn't happy with the direction that it was going. And I could see a lot of people and a lot of things changing societally and collectively. And I was beginning to become part of that change, and I didn't like it. So I decided to change. I decided to change my reality. I decided to change, my own circle, my own world. Like, I can't change the world, but I can change my world. And when I began to change my world, my circle of influence wasn't so much, I wasn't influencing that circle, but when I began to change my world, that circle of influence that I had, that circle changed. Some people within that circle left. More people came into my circle, and the circle actually grew. So it changed. They influenced me. Apparently, I influenced them as well. It's humbling to think about, but that's the reality. When you change your circle, everything changes. And the only way that we can change our circle is by changing ourselves. And whether we want to acknowledge this or not, we are always changing. So we're changing for the better, or we're changing for the worse. Because if you're not growing, you're dying. And the reality is, that's about it. That's really all I can think about in terms of coverage for today's show. We talked about a lot of change last week, and the nature of the change has changed. And we continue to talk about a lot of change today. We're going to continue to examine this change and the idea of simplifying and exactly how to simplify. Because like I said, that conversation with Brian came after a post in the Telegram group at t.me/allaroundgrowth, a post that read, simplify, simplify, simplify. And one other thing that happened, well, one of many things that happened over the past few weeks that just weren't coincidental, because there are no coincidences, was yesterday, New Year's Day, the first of the year. It was the feast of the circumcision of Christ and the feast of St. Basil the Great. I was looking at some things about St. Basil, to learn about St. Basil, and I came across a YouTube video full of quotes by St. Basil. And I think the video is titled The Art of Simplifying. And it was yet another coincidental nudge to me that is the right path. Simplification is the right path. the more cluttered my mind is, the less productive I am. The less productive I am, the more I give is of less value to those I give it to. The things that I want to give, I want to have value in them, because I want to give things and I want to be of service in ways that are of value to people. Right? And so that's where I'm at today. That's where I've been mentally recently. And I imagine that's where I'm going to stay for the next few days, the next few weeks. So the title of today's show is going to involve something about simplifying, the art of simplicity. Simplify, simplify, simplify. I'm not really sure, but I'm curious what you think. I know what Brian thinks. We had a lengthy conversation about that. And if you want to hear it, you can. Join us over on Patreon, patreon.com/allaroundgrowth. But if you're listening to this, let us know on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Any of those places, this episode will be posted and shared. And let me know what you think about simplifying, or the art of simplicity. Let me know how you're going about doing that. Or if you're not, let me know why this episode and this particular topic resonates with you if you think that you should. Because in this day and age, 2024 now, there's a lot that we are exposed to. There's a lot that we are inundated with. And there's a lot that we're losing. And I've become increasingly confident that the more we simplify, the more we can gain. The more we can gain, the more we can give. And the more that we give, the more we can receive in all ways. And that's what all around growth is all about. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you have a great week ahead. I look forward to catching you next week. This is Rob Kaiser, and thank you. God bless.
That I believe in friendship and love, and truth is always the best way to the world that may seem odd. I'm an odd fellow. I'm an odd fellow. Whoa, whoa. I'm an odd fellow. If we stand together, we'll never fall. We can make a difference and answer the call. You know the times are wasting every day, and we can help somebody along the way. That I believe in friendship and love. Truth is always the best way to the world that may seem odd. I'm an odd fellow. You're an odd fellow.